Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about a very important yet incredibly controversial issues which you might have heard on TV and in the news, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So it is a very, very complex and complicated issue, and today we are just going to be able to barely scratch the surface of what's going on, okay? Furthermore, you like to think of wars in terms of who's right and who's wrong. Particularly in this situation, it is very difficult, almost impossible to decide who is right and who is wrong. Maybe both parties are, maybe none is. Still, it is necessary to know at least some details of what is going on, because it's one of the key conflicts in a region, the Middle East, which is full of other conflicts, and all these wars connect to each other and have an impact on our lives, whether we like it or not. So in order to understand what's going on, in order to understand the world in which you live, you need to know about these things, at least one bit. So, to give you an introduction today, we will look at the following points. First, where is Palestine, where is Israel, and who lives there? Second, what happened during the First World War, what happened during the Second World War, and what happened from 1948 onwards. And then I will give you a model answer, which you will find in the transcript. So, where in the world is Palestine and who lives there? Palestine/Israel, I'm going to use Palestine to refer to the geographical region in general, because I could not find any better term, but people who the conflict is so ingrained in the mentality of many people that even calling the entire region Palestine for lack of a better option can be seen as an insult by people who are on the Israeli side. On the same time, if on the other hand, if I use the word Israel to refer to the region, a lot of Palestinians and people who are on the Palestinian side will get upset, and we will see why. Both sides have the reasons. I will use the word Palestine in a geographical sense, not in a political sense. So, Palestine/Israel is a land in the Middle East which is sandwiched between Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. The area is famous for being the location of the Holy City of Jerusalem, which is holy to all of the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. This is one of the reasons why the region has always been invaded and occupied for religious reasons. You can think about the Crusades, for example, in Western Europe. The Crusades where Western European knights invaded it in order to be in the sacred city, to be in the Holy City. Today, the Jewish state of Israel holds most of that area, while some parts are theoretically sort of independent, but under the military occupation in many cases of Israeli soldiers. So, most of the people who live in the area are now Jewish, at least a significant portion. But there are also many, many Muslims and many Arab Christians. We're not used to think of the Arabs as a population that might be Christian. We used to say think Arab equals Muslim, but no, there are a lot of Arab Christians. However, the Jewish majority of the Israeli population is recent, has only arrived in recent decades, and this has created kind of a problem. It is a very complicated situation once again, and we need to look at its history, at its past, in order to understand it, in order to understand why the Muslims are upset at this new Jewish population. It is not just a matter of them having a different religion. There are other causes. Religion is just an excuse in most cases. So, let's start by looking at the First World War. During the Great War, a member of the British Foreign Office named Balfour, his surname was Balfour, issued a document saying that Britain wanted to give the Jews of Europe a national heart in Palestine. The Jews, who were spread as a population all over the world at the time. They did not have a single country to call their own. This is very important to understand. The Jews understood it as an assent to start a new country, to create a new country in Palestine, in British Palestine. And many started moving there. Now, the Jews wanted to live there because, as we said, the area was the place where the ancient Jewish kingdoms of Judah and Israel were located. Everything is described in the Bible, and if you've done your religious studies, you might know a few things about them. However, they had also promised the very same land, the British had also promised the very same lands to the Arabs, ruled at the time by King Hussein. In reality, there are several layers of promises made by the British. A secret document named the Sykes-Picot Agreement, after the two people who signed it, said that Britain and France would take the land for themselves after the war. They would not give it to the Jews, they would not give it to the Arabs. They would keep it for themselves. Now, all of these contradictory promises made both the Jews and the Arabs quite upset and quite unhappy, and you can understand why. And this confusion, this network of broken and contradictory promises, is one of the causes of most of today's problems in the region. Not just in Israel/Palestine, but pretty much everywhere else in the Middle East. Let's jump ahead and see at what happened during the Second World War. Now, during the Second World War, as you know, Nazi Germany famously hated the Jews. This is kind of an understatement, but they started to systematically and inhumanly eliminating them wherever they could find them. Okay, concentration camps, extermination camps. It was a systematic process of find the Jewish population, bring them to the camps, and destroy them. It was, as you can imagine, horrible. This led to the migration of a lot of Jews into Palestine, where they could escape, of course, Nazi Germany and the persecutions that were going on not just in Germany, but in all the areas that were occupied by Germans, by Nazi German soldiers at the time, which went from essentially Russia, Western Russia, to the entirety of France, so essentially the whole of Europe. So Jews from all over Europe migrated to British Palestine. Once they were there, they started buying the land from the Arabs, who tended to be poorer. The Jews came from Europe, they tended to be wealthier and better educated. The Arabs were often not just simply bought out of the land, but they were often actually just kicked out of the land, and they had to find other places to live. And they became what we know of as refugees, people who have been expelled from their native land. Again, this is very complicated, and I'm just trying to scratch the surface here. After the end of the war, the truth behind the Nazis and the Holocaust came to light. The Nazis had killed more than 6 million people just because they were Jewish. Everyone in Europe realized that anti-Semitism, which is the irrational hatred for the Jews, was very dangerous and it could lead to huge tragedies. Therefore, what did they do? In 1948, the newly founded United Nations, which is still an organization that tries to gather together all the countries in the world in order to take important decisions, it rarely works. So the United Nations in 1948 decided that in order to prevent more tragedies, the Jews in Europe needed a place where they could live and rule themselves. This place was Palestine. There were other ideas, Argentina or an island off the coast of Africa named Madagascar. Eventually they settled for the region of Palestine because it had a very important significance for the Jewish people. While at the time most people believed that that was the best solution, nothing wrong could come of it, a lot of Arabs who already lived there were very unhappy with the situation, let's say. Now, what happened next? What happened after 1948? To say that the Arabs were unhappy and unsatisfied with this decision, it's a huge understatement. especially because now the holy city of Jerusalem was in Jewish hands, but it was also a holy city for Islam, and also there was an Arabic population, whether Muslim or not, that had been kicked out of the land. So throughout the 20th century, to sum it up, all the Arab countries surrounding Israel, with very few exceptions, were declared war repeatedly against Israel, and they kind of always lost against Israel, even though they were 6 or 7 countries against one. So let's start from the beginning. There are way too many conflicts, but we need to name at least a few. There was the Israeli War of Independence between 1948 and 49, which was fought between the Arabs who lived there and some helping countries and the Israeli settlers. It was the first conflict. Then in 1956 we got the Suez Crisis. Okay, the Suez Crisis was done as a preemptive strike on Egypt. They sort of knew that Egypt was going to attack them eventually, and therefore they decided to attack first. And in this they were helped by France and Britain, who pretended to be a neutral third party in order to occupy the very, very important Suez Canal that connects the Indian Ocean and Africa and Asia with the Mediterranean Sea. So in 1966, 10 years after the Suez Crisis, we got the 6 Days War, when essentially all Arab countries banded together against Israel and attacked together at the same time. But they were defeated in 6 days. For the religious Jews, it was also the amount of days in which God created the world and then humanity, which is an interesting coincidence. Now, and finally, in 1973, we got the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was attacked by surprise, but was then able to win against all odds. So all of these defeats convinced the Arab states that war against Israel was very difficult to win because of Israel's superior weapons and technology, which they got from essentially Western Europe and the United States. This, however, did not solve the problem of the millions of Arabs who now lived in territories that were under the military occupations of Israel. Since 1973, we did not have any major war, any huge war. There were thousands smaller conflicts, which we'll not list here. The important result was that now there were millions of Arabs who lived in territories under Israeli occupation. The occupation, any military occupation really, can be very difficult to endure. And those territories tend to be very poor, very crowded, and constantly threatened by the retaliations of the Israeli army. Today, the Palestinians occasionally take up arms, and they are mostly sticks, stones, and some homemade rockets, and try to rebel against the Israelis in a way. However, the revolts are always crushed by the Israeli military superiority. The situation in Palestine, as we said several times, is very difficult and very complicated. We generally try to find who the good guys are and who the bad guys are in any given situation. World War II, the Nazis, bad guys. The Allies, the good guys. Again, this is an oversimplification, but it fits our mentality. In here, it's almost impossible. And you will find people who can describe it much better and more thoroughly than I do. This is just an introduction. On the one hand, the Israeli came out of centuries of oppression and from the worst and most criminal genocide in human history, the Holocaust. They deserve, according to their supporters, and I believe that too, they deserve a land where they can live in safety and far away from persecution, because if there is something sure is that anti-Semitism in Europe and North America will keep resurfacing. They are surrounded by countries who want them dead, and therefore they need to defend themselves. The reason why they want them dead is because the Israelis did some controversial things, let's say. On the other hand, the Palestinian Arabs have been kicked out of their homes and the lands to make room for the Israeli settlers, and they have been caught in the crossfire between Israel and the other Arab countries during the countless wars they fought. They now live under harsh military occupation. So, Those were, again, the facts exposed in the most unbiased way I could come up with. Now it's your turn to answer the final question. Why are they fighting in Palestine? I'm looking forward to read what you can write. See you next time.